You're standing over a body. It's cold, dark, inside a narrow cave system. The person in front of you isn't moving. They haven't moved in 2 days. Something inside you refuses to leave them. Not hunger, not fear. Something else entirely. The others in your group are watching you, waiting. No one has words for what you're feeling. Language barely exists. You have grunts, gestures, pointing. But the feeling is there, dense and heavy. Something that says this body matters. Something that says, you don't just walk away. You don't leave them for the hyenas. You don't abandon them where they fell. You carry them, deep into the earth, away from the teeth and the dark. And you don't know why. You just know you have to. 2.8 million years ago. Southern Africa. Homo habilis is alive. Barely. Their brain is roughly half the size of yours. Their tools are crude, sharp-edged stones knocked together at Olduvai Gorge. Simple enough that archaeologists debated for decades whether they were intentional at all. These creatures weren't dominant. They weren't apex anything. Something was killing them constantly. Leopards dragged them into trees. Crocodiles took them at water sources. Saber-tooths hit them from dense cover. They were small, exposed, and desperately outnumbered by the things that wanted to eat them. And yet something was already happening inside that tiny skull. Something beyond survival. Something no one expected to find this early. Something that would eventually become the most uniquely human behavior on the planet. In 2015, a team led by paleoanthropologist Lee Berger descended into the Rising Star cave system near Johannesburg. They needed small-framed researchers. The passage was 7.5 inches wide in places. What they found stopped everything. 15 individuals of a species called Homo naledi, deposited deep inside the cave, deliberately. Not killed there, not dragged in by predators, placed. The bones showed no carnivore damage. No flood deposits had carried them. The only explanation that fit the evidence was intentional. Someone brought them in. Someone carried the dead through narrow passages in complete darkness, navigating hundreds of feet underground, to leave them in a specific chamber. The question wasn't whether it happened. The question was what it meant that something this ancient already understood. The dead were different from the living. Homo naledi had a brain roughly a third the size of yours. They stood about 4.5 feet tall. Their hands were curved, built for climbing. Their feet were nearly human. They existed in the margins, not strong enough to dominate, not fast enough to outrun most predators. By every biological measure that mattered in that world, they were vulnerable, and they still did this. They still moved their dead underground deliberately. No grave goods, no ochre, no ceremony anyone can reconstruct with certainty. Just the act itself, the carrying, the placement, the refusal to leave the dead where they fell. That refusal is the oldest ritual we found. Older than art, older than language as we understand it, possibly older than controlled fire. The behavior predates almost everything we typically call human. Here's what makes this harder to dismiss. The Rising Star cave had no food, no water source, no shelter advantage. There was no practical reason to enter it at all. Navigating those passages required light. It required coordination between multiple individuals. It required carrying dead weight through spaces barely large enough for a living body. Every part of the process was costly. Time, energy, risk. You don't do that by accident. You don't do that on instinct alone. Even the most sophisticated predator never expends energy on its dead. A cave lion doesn't carry its fallen. A saber-tooth doesn't return to a body to shield it from scavengers. Whatever drove these creatures into the dark, it wasn't anything evolution had ever selected for before. It was something new. The Cima de los Huesos, pit of bones, Atapuerca, Spain. Deep inside a cave system, at the bottom of a 43-foot vertical shaft, archaeologists recovered the skeletal remains of at least 28 individuals, dating to roughly 430,000 years ago. Homo heidelbergensis, a transitional species, not quite Neanderthal, not quite us. One object was recovered alongside them, a single hand axe, shaped from red quartzite, a material not found anywhere near the cave. Someone carried it from a distance. Someone dropped it down the shaft deliberately. No other tools, no animal bones. No evidence of habitation, just the dead and one red stone. Scientists call it Excalibur. It's the oldest known grave offering in human history, dropped into darkness by hands that were almost, but not quite human. What were they thinking? That's the question no one can fully answer. They had no written language, no recoverable speech. We can't reach back 430,000 years and ask. But the behavior itself is a record. The Cima individuals weren't scattered randomly. They weren't dumped. They were deposited into a single location over what appears to be a sustained period. Multiple events. Multiple trips, a repeated practice. That's not instinct. Instinct is automatic. Instinct doesn't require planning across separate occasions. What this required was memory, the ability to connect a previous event to a future action, the ability to decide that the dead belongs somewhere specific. These creatures were holding on to something we still hold on to. The idea that a body, even an empty one, still matters. By 100,000 years ago, the evidence becomes harder to argue with. Kuafza Cave, Israel. A child buried with deer antlers placed across both arms. Skul Cave, Mount Carmel. An adult male interred with a wild boar jaw cradled in his hands. These are early modern humans, anatomically us. But the behavior didn't start with us, that's the point. Neanderthals at Shanidar Cave in Iraq placed their dead in pits. Some researchers found pollen traces suggesting flowers may have accompanied the bodies. That specific finding has been contested for decades. But the graves themselves haven't been. The positioning of bodies, the inclusion of objects, the deliberate return to the same locations. All of it real. All of it predating our arrival in those regions by tens of thousands of years. Neanderthals get dismissed constantly. In popular culture, they're shorthand for brutish and slow. Their brain was actually slightly larger than yours on average. They cared for their injured. The Shanidar individual had a withered arm, a fused leg, a crushed eye socket. Injuries sustained long before death. He survived for years with those disabilities. Someone was feeding him. Someone helped him move. Someone kept him alive long after he should have died from those wounds alone. This matches the pattern from Dmanisi, Georgia, 1.8 million years earlier. The toothless elder kept alive by his group, two completely separate species, divided by over 1 million years, doing the same thing, protecting the ones who couldn't protect themselves, and both of them returning their dead to the earth with intention. Here's what the fossil record keeps saying. The further back we look, the more we find this. Not everywhere. Not at every site, but the pattern appears too early, too consistently, across too many separate lineages to dismiss. Something in the architecture of a social primate brain, something that emerged when groups became dependent enough on each other to grieve, produced this behavior before it produced almost anything else we consider complex. Before the cave paintings at Chauvet, 36,000 years ago. Before the Venus figurines. Before Stonehenge by hundreds of thousands of years. The response to death came first. The recognition that the person lost still required something from the living, that the relationship didn't simply end when breathing stopped. The predators never did this, not once. No excavation has uncovered a cave lion carried deliberately to a resting place by its pride. No direwolf arranged underground by grieving kin. No short-faced bear accompanied into a pit with intention. For 2 million years, those animals hunted us. Stronger, faster, better equipped by every biological measure that should have determined who survived. And the gap between us and them wasn't fire alone. Wasn't endurance or language or spears. Part of it was this. The group that mourns its dead is the group that understands what each member was worth. That understanding changed cooperation entirely. It made the bonds between individuals load-bearing in a way no predator's bonds ever were. The group that grieves fights harder to protect the living. We don't know the full story of Rising Star. The dating is still being refined. The behavioral interpretation is still debated. But contested doesn't mean dismissed. The evidence sits there. 15 individuals carried into the dark by hands nearly identical to yours, through passages no wider than a human torso, into a chamber sealed from the surface world that was actively trying to eat everything alive at the time. Something was already asking a question no predator ever asked. Something was already drawing a line between a body and the open ground, between one of ours and everything else out there. We don't know what they called it. We don't know if they called it anything, but we've been answering that same question.